My name is Carlos Valdes-Dapena, and I'm a No-Limitspreneur.
You're now locked onto another episode of the Nolimitspreneur Podcast, the show that helps you dominate in life and in business to enhance your mindset, confidence, productivity, time management, habits, and goals. And now, your host, Maher Abiad.
Hey, what is up, Success Nation? It's your boy, Maher Abiad here, back with you again for another fantastic episode. And in this episode, I have Carlos Valdes-Dapena on the show today. Carlos is a collaboration expert who used to work at companies such as Mars and IBM. He has a number of great books out, such as his recent book called Virtual Teams and his popular book called Lessons from Mars. He runs his own consultancy firm named Corporate Collaboration Resources, and he is also a fantastic speaker as well. And I'm really excited for Carlos to share his wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much to Carlos Valdes-Dapena for coming on the Nolimitspreneur Podcast. I'm super excited to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come on the show.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. This is the sort of place I like to spend my time.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I appreciate that. You definitely have an amazing history. You have a wonderful story. You've definitely done so many things. And you're obviously an expert in team collaboration and team building and whatnot. So I definitely want to get some more information from you so we can share with the audience and leaders in the audience that are listening today and management teams and also employees as well on how we can work better together. Before we jump into some of your books that I definitely want to learn more about the content in your amazing books, I want to actually learn about your story. You have an amazing story, like I said. If you can kind of take us back to, from when you got started, how you kind of transitioned to where you are now, so we can kind of get a bit of a feel of sort of where you've come from to where you are today.
Yeah. So for years in my life, I worked inside companies. I am almost by nature a consultant. That's sort of how I'm wired, yeah? I love to be a thought partner and help people work through problems and solve them. But I was doing that as an internal consultant. You know why? Security. I loved getting that paycheck every 2 weeks. And I've worked in a consulting firm. I've worked in a couple of small firms, IBM and Mars, large firms. So I've run the gamut. And every so often, and let me make sure I got your name, Maher? Maher. Okay. Every so often, Maher, people would say to me, boy, that's an interesting idea you've got. You should think about going out on your own. And I resisted that for decades, literally decades. I guess I'm just lucky that I have sort of I come at things from a different angle often, not all the time. I can be fairly conventional as well, but in my field of organizational consulting, I tended to be oriented differently. I don't know how else to say it. Well, my last full-time job, so I worked for a consulting firm in the 90s, then I worked for IBM the end of the 90s and the early 2000s, and then I got hired by Mars Incorporated, where I was an internal organization effectiveness consultant. And I did a range of things. I did a lot of organization design, culture change management when we do reorganizations. And somewhere around 2010, I was asked to be an internal consultant for teams. I had no intention of going there. My dream was I was going to be a leadership consultant. When I worked at IBM, I was an internal executive coach to the top 35, to a subset of the top 35 global leaders. It was a small team of us doing that. And I thought, that's where I'm going to live, man. That's my thing. Went to Mars, didn't have much chance to do the leadership work there. And then this team thing cropped up around 2009, 2010. I thought, well, I'm working inside the big company, need to keep getting that paycheck, so I'll do it. And it was just one of those serendipitous things. It turned out it was a calling for me. Now I'm late in career is a nice way of saying it, that I'm an old guy. And this was 10 years ago, maybe a little more. So I was still coming up on the last stages of my career. And it's interesting when you find your calling at that point in your life, right? By the way, I'm also a parent. I have two grown kids, and I'm a passionately involved parent. I've got grandkids now, so a very full life. When I talk about a calling, I'm speaking specifically about a professional one. And so I followed that that I followed that invitation, right? It was again something I stumbled into. And it led to the research I eventually did that led to the book Lessons from Mars, that then led to the book, the virtual collaboration book that came out just the last month. And I have somewhat unwittingly, but with full commitment and passion, once I got into it, become this collaboration expert. And that's not expert, by the way, is not a word I use lightly. I'm always a little wary because I know there's so much I don't know. And perhaps the most appropriate definition of expert is a person who has learned just how much they still have to learn about their field. So I'm in the end of 2017, Mars was reshuffling again. Mars had a tendency to want to reorganize a lot. I was asked to head up the change management effort as they brought the chocolate business, M&M's, Snickers, all of that, together with the Wrigley business, which had been acquired back in 2008. And I was working the change management on that, but I agreed to do that under a year-by-year contract. Because once they reorganized, that would mean they'd be shedding some jobs, and ultimately my job was shed as a part of that. And so I circle back to where I started. People had said to me, Carlos, you ought to go out on your own and try to bring some of what is innately you to the world, whatever that might be. And back then, I didn't know. But now that I knew, I still had a few good years left. I could have kept taking the paycheck every 2 weeks, but I thought, if I go to my death one day and I've never gone out and tried it on my own, I will regret that probably more deeply than anything else, because my life otherwise has been really rich, right? And so I made the step. I walked out the door and said, thank you very much, and set up shop, got the book published in 2018, and no looking back from there.
That's an amazing story. I mean, you hit a number of points that I'm a huge proponent of as well, and I really respect you for what you've done. One thing you said was you definitely, you accepted change. You kind of went through, you found a new sort of calling, and you were able to sort of pivot into that change. The other thing, I mean, you're saying that obviously to not have regrets. I think that's obviously something very crucial in life that we try to limit as much as possible. And for you to do sort of your own thing and really kind of go your own path, that definitely shows courage. And to be able to, another thing you mentioned is expert. Obviously, I always say you don't stop learning at age 18 when you graduate school. And that's, congratulate, you on, continuing to learn and better yourself. I think as humans, we have to always learn as much as we can. We're never sort of, no matter what state we are, expert state or whatever, we're always bettering ourselves. So that's absolutely fantastic story. I wanted to talk to you about, as you know, we're without question, we're in unprecedented times right now, and a lot of teams are not working in an office environment. They are working from a remote environment. They're doing what we're doing right now, almost talking on a Zoom call. Yeah. And you came out with your book, Virtual Teams, which is out on Amazon. And I wanted to ask you, can you sort of shed some light on how employees can perhaps stay motivated working from home, stay focused from working from home? Because working from home and not working in an office are two separate things. There's a lot of distractions working at home. There's sort of a tendency maybe not to be as motivated or a different type of motivation. Can you talk a little bit about your book, recent book, and sort of to how employees can stay motivated and stay productive?
Sure. It's a great question. And I think the first thing to acknowledge is the diversity of circumstances people work in, right? So I have no kids in the house anymore. There are many who have their kids who now school is out for summer here in North America, but they've been having to cope with not just working from home, but having to do that with their kids in the house, right? Or for the first time with their spouse around all the time, putting strains on marriages, or completely isolated, people who don't have a live-in partner. So the flavors of stress out there vary. Does that make sense? And I have been reading every day. I open a new article that talks about how to manage this stress or manage that stress. And it's very much about your individual circumstances, right? Some of the common themes, and I'll talk about collaboration in a minute, because I think one of the great antidotes to these stresses is how we set up collaboration to make it motivating. Got back to that. But have a work, if you can, and not everybody can you create a workspace that is just your workspace? If you can't, can you have a few things, and I just read about this yesterday, that you take with you no matter where you put your workspace when you get up in the morning? It may be in the dining room one day, it may be in the living room the next day, depending on what's going on around you. But have those things that are icons or symbols of your workplace, so that it reminds you and gives you some boundaries for the place where you do that thing you're getting a check for, right? I thought that was tremendously sage. The other thing is, give yourself a break. I was talking to a colleague today who's a dean at a university in the Midwest, and he, like a lot of people, he's not commuting to work anymore. So this adds an hour and a half to 2 hours to his day. So he has no qualms about stopping mid-afternoon and taking a break, catching up on the news, maybe even taking a nap, right? So that self-care is really important. And we know that the workday has increased by roughly 40% because this commute has gone away. And the strains also, one of the other things we find is people are collaborating. They're on Zoom more. They're on Skype more. Why? They're worried if they don't talk to each other more, things are going to fall between the cracks. Those cumulative stressors will end up eventually causing some kind of burnout. Yeah? So let's talk about teams for a second. I have a motto. Now, my wife and I argue about this motto, but I'm going to give it to you and then we'll sort through it. And that motto has a big role to play in how you manage your time and energy during this particularly odd stretch of our lives. To collaborate better, collaborate less, but only on the things that matter most. To collaborate better, collaborate less on those things that matter most. Here's the deal. There's a phenomenon that was identified in Harvard Business Review a couple years ago called collaborative overload. Everybody has to be on the team all the time, always working with each other. It's exacerbated in open office environments where we're always visible to each other. And then you've got technology, which means I can Skype with you, or I can text you, or I can WhatsApp you 24/7, 365. Collaborative overload. It's gotten really bad. My approach to collaboration begins with this idea that not everything requires collaboration. In fact, we got to go from a generic notion of teamwork. By generic, I mean not particularly clearly defined, to a really clear understanding of what requires collaboration, who needs to be involved, who doesn't need to be involved, and therefore what can be done by talented, capable individuals, right? And so we start to get really focused on where the work has to be done collaboratively. Collaboration is messy. It's time-consuming. It tends to lead to conflict. So you only want to use it where it's truly going to create value. Does that make sense? So my job with teams and then with organizations full of teams is to teach them how to identify the real value-add collaboration, focus on that, let everything else be done by individuals or small groups, which requires less energy, is less prone to conflict, and is less complex. Yeah? So in this time of COVID-19, teams need to say, you know what? Let's not be on Zoom calls 5 hours a day. What are the 2 or 3 big projects that we all need to be a part of? Maybe it's only one, right? Let's use our meeting time for those things. And let's be really clear that everything else that's in the remit of our team can be done either by capable individuals or 2 people working together, right? And this then creates space. First of all, what it does is it says suddenly our meetings aren't about sitting around a virtual Zoom room and reviewing everybody's projects and everybody's work. No, right? Or we're going to focus our meeting time on co-creating around the work that matters to all of us, that's meaningful for all of us, because we've made those choices. And then everything else gets done in other less energy-sapping ways. Because I'll tell you, Zoom fatigue, that's real. That is real. And if we're sitting around just doing a project review on everybody's list of to-dos, that's just going to, it's crushing. So we focus, we collaborate better, by collaborating less on those things that really matter the most and benefit most from it.
I think that's a very, very powerful quote. To collaborate better, collaborate less on what matters most. I think just focus on, and that's a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you as well. On focus, you mentioned motivation as well. Before we kind of jump into that, I want to actually really talk more about your book. It is an amazing book. I want to learn more about the reasoning behind the book, the idea for it, Lessons from Mars. It's a fantastic book that talks about collaboration teams. A couple weeks back, I launched a podcast episode. It was titled "The Lessons Learned from the Netflix documentary called The Last Dance." Last Dance was a documentary about the Chicago Bulls, Michael Jordan, and one of the points and the lessons that I spoke about was the importance of teams and the importance of surrounding yourself with people that will lift you up, that will help you get forward in life, and not surrounding yourself with toxic people or people that bring you down. Can you talk more about your book, the reasoning behind it, how it came about, and sort of more about the ideas that leaders, management can get from that?
Well, I hear two things in your question. One is about the nature of the people on your team, and the other is what people can get from it. So let me start with the second one first. I honestly believe that the team is the thing within organizations that gives people the most value and meaning out of their work, right? That's where we identify. Sure, if you work for a company like Mars that has it's family-owned, Mars, and it's got a strong values-based culture, certainly we connect to the Mars culture, those of us who work there. But where you really get your juice is in your work group. And it's one of the reasons I think I've landed so strongly, because I believe a strong team with focus and the ability to execute together becomes a powerful force in kind of like what you were saying, in making you a better person, but also giving you a place to give back, right? I can help my teammates be better, just the way they help me be better. We make each other better. That's a powerful, powerful dynamic if you can ignite it in a team. Not every team can do it, right? So let's park that. So the team for me is it. I remember I was at an airport once and I went onto Facebook, and I traveled a tremendous amount when I was at Mars because I worked with teams around the world. And I made this note, getting at a plane, changing the world one team at a time. And by gosh, I really believe in that. I believe that our teams can change our lives. And as Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of passionate, committed people can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. I think it's not magical. It's just fundamentally human, right? The team. Now, it doesn't work if you don't have the right people on the team, right? I think, and I talk about this in the latest book, which is a virtual adaptation of the original work, right? It's like, how do you apply these practices in a virtual setting? I talk about, I've lost my train of thought. Where was I going with that? It's about the people and the quality of the people, and now I've lost it. But I'll just go back to the idea of the people. I know what it is. For me, the uber competency for teams, the thing that distinguishes a great team from a mediocre team is, well, first of all, people will tell you it's trust. I'm not so sure. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's something else. I think it's learning. A team that has figured out how to learn together. Now, you can't learn together. That is, when I talk about learning together, Maher, I talk about me making a mistake and being able to talk to you about it and not feeling like you're going to trash me for it, right? You're just going to say, Carlos, awesome opportunity to learn. Let's talk about it. Let's dig deeper into it, right? Because we're making each other better. That's trust right there, right? But it's the ability to learn together that means we're constantly adapting. A team that can learn together can derive new lessons like the Bulls did, right? I mean, it's about lessons learned. It's about how are we taking the things we go through, debriefing about how they went, doing an after action review, pulling out the one or two key lessons and then putting those into our kit and taking our game up another level. The team that learns together is the team that thrives. And a team that thrives is good for the team itself, for the individuals in the team, and for the organization. So you got to find people who are up for that, right? Right? And it's maybe something you can't teach. I'm not sure. You can teach chemistry. You can teach R&D. You can teach HR policy. You can teach finance. But that hunger to learn and to keep growing that you and I started talking about, that's what I look for.
I think a full team buy-in has to be there. Everybody sort of has to be on board with this sort of messaging. Like, you obviously have the leadership, CEO, whatnot, knowing where the ship is going. But everybody sort of has to be on board to be able to get that ship there. And if there's any sort of kinks in the armor, you have that sort of, things that can hold you back. The organization can't grow as efficiently as possible. And one thing I wanted to ask you was, with that, how can leaders motivate? How can leaders motivate individuals, their teams, to be able to do that good work, to be able to do the work that matters, to be sort of, to obviously motivate them to be able to continue, with the overall messaging and the direction of the organization?
Yeah. So I think the key thing to remember here is that people come preloaded with motivation, right? They do. Most people I've worked with over my 35 plus years as a grown working adult, most people I work with are pretty internally motivated. So then the question becomes, how do you tap into that, right? How do you unleash it? So one key insight from the research I did at Mars on the collaboration, I want to go back to that trust thing for a minute. The commonly held conception is that what gets in the way of collaboration is lack of trust. And there are any number of team models that say this. What we found was at Mars, there was a lot of trust, and it varied from team to team and from person to person, because trust is a highly variable experience. But what we found that was consistently stopping collaboration was that the individuals who were on these teams, who had been hired as individuals, were being paid as individuals, would be recognized and promoted as individuals, were tending to default to their individual work. They'd say, well, this is what they're paying me to do, is projects like this. I got to do it. I'll help you out if you need it. Come tap me on the shoulder, but then I got to get back to what I'm doing. After all, I've got to put bread on the table. I got to feed my family. That powerful individual achievement drive, it's called, and it comes up in various studies of motivation. That achievement drive is the barrier to collaboration. So what we did was we built this framework for collaboration that I talk about in that book, in both books. We realized you can tap into that individual achievement drive and direct it towards collaboration. If you can make collaboration feel like just another thing to be achieved that I can tick off my list and feel good about and feel like I'm advancing the ball down the field, it's not hard, right? The key, and that's exactly the motivation you want to tap into. You want to tap into that individual achievement drive, but you want to nudge it over towards the work that requires collaboration. And by the way, you don't tell people, oh, by the way, this work requires collaboration. You say, here's the work, guys. Which of these pieces gets you juiced? Which of these pieces do you feel if you could bring your best to it, it would make it better because you're working with others on it? Where would your collaboration add value? You open people up to say, hey, I'm driven by that, man. That gets my juices flowing. They sign up, right? And they go for it. So it's about tapping into the existing motivation in a way that enables collaboration rather than gets in the way of it.
I think, as an entrepreneur, you always want to wake up with sort of that fire in your belly to start the day, to be motivated to work on what's important to you. As an employee, obviously, you want to be motivated to go into work that day. You want to be excited for the contribution and, like you said, collaboration of, bettering the organization. So then, the customer, the end customer can win. And, there's a win for you, a win for the company, a win for the customer. And that is super important. But on the flip side of this, I wanted to ask you about what your thoughts and sort of strategies are with in organizations. You can't, as an employee, for example, if I'm an employee, working at a company, I can't sort of control who I'm working with. Right. And the question I wanted to ask of you is, how do you go about dealing with difficult people? How do you go about dealing with difficult coworkers? How do you go about dealing with sort of people that just aren't on the same page? And going back to the teams thing we were talking about with the documentary, how do you bring people on board that just aren't, bought in? But I mean, more from an employee point of view, how do you kind of, still go to work that day and know that, you have to deal with this person that just, might give you a little bit of strife?
I'm sitting here, I have 19 answers to that question, and I'll run a few of them up the flagpole and see if anybody salutes out there. One is, that's kind of, if we're in a workplace with other people, right? We will encounter that. We will encounter those people we don't get along with, whose personalities are different from ours. It's going to happen. And part of being a mature adult, I think, is saying life's going to happen to you that way. You're going to get some people where tension's going to be there. And I heard a great thing today, listening to a couple of consultants at a conference. If we label the tension as a barrier, we're stuck. But if we see the tension as a dynamic tension and a space where we can learn, we can, for example, we can practice our skills at dealing with someone who's a little grating. We can learn the patience. We can learn to listen. We can learn to appreciate different points of view. We use that discomfort as a chance to learn, getting back to that theme. I think one of the biggest mistakes people make is when they identify this person. And I've had these people on teams, and I've been one of these people, I'm sure. Look, if you're leading a team and you have set goals clearly and you've set expectations clearly, and somebody repeatedly doesn't live up to those or meet those, this is something a great entrepreneur years ago taught me. I was managing a team where he had one of these people who just wasn't carrying their weight. And he said, Carlos, look, I get it. That's an uncomfortable conversation to have with her. But you know what the problem with this is? The rest of the team sees it. They see you not addressing that problem, and it's bringing the team down. They're not going to talk to you about it, but they are going to judge you as not being decisive, as not addressing a clearly problematic situation. And it's going to make your team look dysfunctional when in fact it's just that one person. So you have a choice to make, right? Either you act for the good of the team and ultimately for the good of that person because it's not a good fit, or you let your team slowly deteriorate, right? So that's a little bit about just doing the difficult thing, having the tough conversation and knowing that it's the right thing for the team, right? I think the last thing is going back to the framework that I developed out of the research I did. We want diverse teams. We want teams of people with different styles, different patterns of thinking, different backgrounds. Why? Because when you put those together in the right way, it leads to learning and innovation, right? When you have a lot of difference in a team, you're at risk of losing your commonality as a team. What is it that holds us together that's bigger than the fact that we all work for Carlos or we all work in finance? A team needs an identity to really hold together. And that identity is best based around your work, right? So what a strong manager will do is say, okay, guys, what is our collaborative value add? And what's that higher level purpose we're all working for, whether I'm an introvert or an extrovert, whether I love working down in the details or I'm a big picture person, whether I talk a lot or I listen a lot, no matter the differences, what's that thing we all agree we're in this together for? That helps. It doesn't necessarily deal with the difficult person, but suddenly I'm more likely to want to work with you if I know we've all committed to go for the same thing together. A goal is an important part, but this sense of purpose, of shared identity and meaning, that's really important. I talk a lot about that in both books, by the way, because it helps too when you're working remotely. That sense of shared identity. I may not be in the room with you, but I know that we have this common thing that we created that we're working for and working towards that gives our efforts meaning and importance. So that can help too.
I think at the end of the day, I mean, it's all about communication. I think if we're able to better communicate, and talk about it, bring things out in the open, communication, not just in relationships, a couple, the workplace, it's super important, not just between a manager and the employee, but between the employees as well, to be able to say, hey, you know what? I need your help on this. I'm struggling with this. Can you do this? Or, I think you can do this a little bit better or whatnot. I think communication is something we don't do enough of effectively. And I think that would solve a lot of the issues that we may face.
I think the thing I want to add to that, to build on it, because you're right. If we're able to think of communications think of a team as an economy, and we're exchanging value all the time. I'm giving you this, you give me that, information, ideas, whatever it might be, energy. In the exchange between you and me, too often people think of communication as the words I say. You know what's important is, I just read this doing some research for my next book. It's a thing called generative listening. Listening with the intent of creating something out of that, of creating a stronger bond. Listening with the intent of being able to build on. Deep listening that leads to a new connection and possibly new ideas. That's the thing about communication we too often gloss over. We're not terribly good listeners anymore, and we need to do more and more of that, especially nowadays with the world being what it is.
Yeah, and I think one of the last questions I wanted to ask you was, I wanted to ask you about, as you just mentioned, not being good enough listeners that we could be. And I think an issue with that is the rise of social media, the rise of sort of not interacting with individuals as much. We're social creatures, but with the advent of social media platforms and whatnot, we're doing more sort of quick texting and sort of things that aren't really going down to our sort of tribal and primal, creative needs as well. And I wanted to ask you about being focused, how we can focus, because there are so many distractions with, say, as I was saying, social media and whatnot. You as an entrepreneur, how do you focus on sort of getting things done and not having the distractions, an email popping in or a text message popping in or whatnot. And for, people working at work, of course, one of the biggest issues I faced when I, was in the workforce as well was constant emails coming in, and those distractions. Like every time you're working on something, you have, somebody coming in the office, you have an email coming in, and you're going from what you're working on to now this other thing, and your mind now is going to take a lot longer to revert back to what you're working on, to give you that mental juice to get you back on track. Talk a little bit more about that.
So first of all, I want to make a distinction between the many kinds of people in the world. And some people do well with distraction. Other people don't do it all well with distraction. I'll talk about strategies I employ that have served me really, really well as a person who is late in life diagnosed with ADHD. I allow room in my day for distractions. So I actually plan for the distractions, right? And I actually use them. I find because my attention span is fairly short, I use the distractions. I acknowledge the shortness of the attention span. I'll take an email or two. As my attention wanders, I'll go, okay, let me go do a couple of emails, and then I'll go back to this thing I need to focus on. So I make the distractions okay, but I also let those distractions know who's in charge, right? Certainly, look, if you get a call from a client and there's a big problem and you got to put that fire out, that's a distraction I'm going to go pay attention to. The other part of the equation is every day I set small manageable goals for myself. This is one of the oldest techniques in the world. But I say today the key things I have to get done are this, this, and this. Anything I get done on top of that is gravy, right? And I make sure when I look at that set of goals that, again, they account for the fact that there will be distractions, whether it's my kid, my older daughter calling who needs help with the grandkids, or it's an email that comes in and a client with a problem. I don't want to use a big word, but it's about consciousness. It's about saying, look, this is how the day goes. It's going to have distractions. I'm going to set some simple goals. And every once in a while, I got to let go of my goals because something bigger comes along. But I think what happens is we get lost in the urge to go. It's about going. It's not about, we forget that we have goals we want to achieve. I mean, look, I'm on a mission, man, right? My life at this point is I'm on a mission around this team effectiveness framework I've got. I'm lucky. I get to call myself on that and say, hey, hang on, Carlos, is what you're doing right now getting you what you really want to do in the world? Is it getting you closer? Sometimes I say, no, it's not, but I need to do it. But other times I say, yep, it's not getting me there. I got to get back on track. So it's really important to have both the daily goals, but also for me, that bigger sense of purpose on the planet, right? There's a dent I want to make in the universe. I don't know if I'll make it, but that's the ultimate anti-distraction tool I have.
I think purpose is a great sort of North Star navigator, compass to lead you. You're obviously doing a lot of great things, and you definitely have an amazing vision. And thank you so much for sharing so much of what you shared with the Nolimitspreneur Podcast audience today. I wanted to wrap up by asking you to share how people can sort of learn more about you if they want to get in touch, learn about your company, corporate collaboration resources. Talk about that, sort of what you're doing to help companies with their team building and team collaboration, and of course, how people can reach out if they want.
So what I've got is the research I did at Mars, which we didn't talk a whole lot about, but it led to a framework. It led to we call it a framework. It's 6 practices that teams can employ to focus their collaboration on the right things in the right ways, right? I was thinking about it today as it's almost like designing collaboration. It's a very intentional way to approach not generic teamwork, rah, but specific collaborative efforts that are going to really redound to everybody's benefit. So I've got this framework, and I've got a small cadre of passionate followers who are using it and finding it productive. My mission in life is to get this to more and more organizations. Mars was good enough to let me walk out the door and share this research with others. It's making a huge difference to those using it. So that's really what I'm focused on in my life right now. That's why the books. That's why I'm running yet another book, which will come at it from a different angle. I work with individual leaders as a coach for their team leadership capabilities. I work with individual teams. I'm heading off next week. My first socially distanced face-to-face team encounter is going to be next week. I'm interested to see how that goes. And I teach consultants how to use the methodology. So those are the big places I play. To find out more about any of that, you can go to my website, Carlos V as in Victor, Dapena, Dapena, Carlos V. Dapena. And I don't know if you'll have something at your website, Maher, or some point of reference for folks, but carlosvdapena.com. And you can learn more about me, about what I do, about my books. And I've got blogs up there, articles, some videos I've done. So that's where to turn for more. And of course, you can always buy the book, Lessons from Mars, on Amazon, or the more recent book, which is Virtual Teams, Holding the Center When You Can't Meet Face-to-Face.
Carlos Valdes-Dapena, thank you so much for coming on the Nolimitspreneur Podcast. You've definitely shared a ton of value, and I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today.
Delighted to have been with you, Maher. Thank you for spending some time with me.
Thanks once again to my guest, Carlos Valdes-Dapena, for coming on the show today. I hope you got a ton of value from all that we spoke about today. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you do not miss out on more amazing guests that I have lined up that will be on the show in upcoming episodes. And please leave a review. If you are on iTunes, you can share a review for others so they can also get the benefit that you got out of today's episode. Once again, my name is Maher Abiad. You've been locked on to another amazing episode of the Nolimitspreneur Podcast. I'll catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to another quality episode of the Nolimitspreneur Podcast with your host, Maher Abiad. Want to continue to master your mindset? Download the 7 self-limiting beliefs that are stealing your success away guide for free right now at NoLimitsMindset.com.